So I was thinking like, when you're walking around a big building, you just can't find the office.
Yeah.
Indoor GPS navigation, basically. Just like a little neon sign or something, like a little app on your phone, just kind of go around. But like on a much smaller scale where maybe you know the building and it's like, hey, take this staircase, not the other one that leads you to the janitor's closet, right? Sup, Pample, it's Mike Check Mike.
Hey, it's Eugene.
It's Jonathan.
And today's episode will be a bit different than usual. We're going to try and play with a bit of a different format, still sticking to the big question and thanks mom, but, remixing things a little bit to fit into your morning commute a bit better. So, gentlemen, for today, I have a fun question to challenge, but one I think is pretty important for us to tackle. And it's, are we building technology faster than we understand its consequences? Which probably pretty topical. We got a few things like AI and stuff that have had different implications from anywhere from moral to environmental, for example. And so maybe a segue from that into something maybe a little more specific that we can discuss is how often are ethical concerns raised after the fact rather than baked into the development process?
I think I'll just take a stab at this first. I think entrepreneurs and engineers alike were so captivated with creating products, creating things, that a lot of times we focus on just creating something that we think is cool in our head or things that we think can solve the world without really taking maybe a lot more time to thinking what can happen once this kind of tech is out there, both the good and also the bad. Like how can maybe bad players in the world can use whatever tech. So I think one good example could probably be like drones, maybe. A lot of people use drones for like pastime activities. People use drones to collect cool footage. If you're going to explore the Swiss Alps, you have a drone flying over, get some really sick footage. But you also have the Ukraine war and then what's going on with there. People using drones, low cost solutions to create a lot of damage. And maybe some people were already speculating that drones can be like, casual drones can be used to that extent. But definitely, I'm sure it's a bit of a shock for some people maybe a year or two ago when all this was being played out. So to answer your question, Michael, I would definitely say it's not common for ethical concerns, especially ethical concerns, to be considered, especially when you're trying to create products, just because of all the tendencies that we have just to create something just for the sake of creating it.
Yeah, I think that's a good example of how consumer products can be used for like defense cases and sometimes like misused, especially these like very cheap weapons or like potential liability, because it's very easy for like anyone to get their hands on one and to like build like a potential weapon. But when it comes to this point, I think it's difficult to bake ethical concerns into products because sometimes the eventual effects of a product are extremely hard to predict. I think a good example of this would be social media. So when it was initially being developed, like the focus was on how do we maybe connect people? How do we, show them ads? How do we like build a profile on them? And like, it's sort of innocuous or maybe a little bit like creepy from the surveillance perspective, but mostly innocuous. But now there's all these unintended effects. For example, there's like declining social health among young people, and there's people's like inability to focus, which they often contribute to social media or attribute to social media.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an interesting aspect, like what you mentioned, where sometimes you don't anticipate the effect at all. And I think there's one that's maybe, I don't know if equal, but also pervasive, let's say. And it's when you do try and see or anticipate what's going to happen, but your early tests or your control environments are not necessarily representative, and you're not necessarily putting the attention on that aspect of your testing. So I'm thinking medical, for example, where sometimes you'll be testing different medication types, but your sample population might not be representative of a certain community, for example. And so you're really not testing for how certain genes will be receptive to XYZ treatment, right? And so that's kind of another aspect where like you may have actually put in the effort to anticipate some adverse reactions, or at least it's a known thing, for example, like a known unknown, let's say. And so to look out for it, but it's that your controlled environment hasn't been properly baked in. And so in that sense, you haven't put in that sort of the foresight at that level. So I guess that brings a good question of, a lot of times when you don't spend the time to think or anticipate these things, it's really because you're trying to get to market as fast as possible. And so this maybe raises a side question of, is speed a competitive edge, or is it really just liability in disguise, I guess?
That's a good question. And what comes to my mind immediately would be, I think speed on its own is just a tool, but I think what you need along with speed is just the foresight and being able to see, like being more intentional with how you're going to go about things quickly. Where there is a world where a company can go fast, but kind of fumble their way and kind of run into whatever roadblocks that may pop up in front of them as they go along. Or you have people who have laid out a plan and then they execute that quickly because they've thought up of all the process, all the steps, and then just be really efficient with their time as well. So speed, when you're speed, especially in tech companies, it could be a competitive edge, but you can't try to do things blindly. Like there is the whole common mentality of fail fast, where it's like, people just try to go quickly and just test things. But a lot of times people test things without being really intentional with what they are testing, let alone testing in a accurate environment and testing the right things. So they may end up with biased or inaccurate results that they would then try to use to try to make insights and intuition on other decisions that could be wrong that would hurt them in the future.
Another thing, there's something to be said about sort of the move fast and break things, or the move fast culture, where I believe it does likely lead to some short-term games, which I think is why it's so appealing and why people want to lean into that. But it does kind of hide more reflective practices where you may pause and actually consider the impacts of what you're doing. So yeah, I think that'd be kind of my my statement there.
Yeah, and when it comes to whether, I guess, speed is a liability or an asset, I think it partially depends on how much oversight and regulation you're subject to. So for example, like in a fast-paced environment during wartime, there's a lot more like room to develop things that are like ethically dubious because there's less potential oversight, or because you're in direct competition like with an enemy who's also developing things. And because of that, like there's a big push to develop like autonomous lethal weapons, specifically to like make drones like more capable of finding and killing targets on their own. And there's some very appealing reasons why you do that from a perspective of like, I don't want my soldiers to be put in harm's way. But I think that sort of that push for like rapid development in a way that's like ethically complicated or dubious can really happen because there's not like a governing body that can really like step in and say like, oh, you can't do that. Yeah, because by its very nature, war is sort of like, you do what you can to win.
That's true. And that thing brings up a good question to segue into, of when you have sort of these called circumstances that force you in a certain direction. Do you believe that innovators truly understand the broader impact of what they're doing, and then maybe they choose to ignore it because of that situational aspect, or are they fully cognizant and maybe just make that active decision?
I think it's difficult because at first it can be difficult to anticipate how your technology will be used, but there is certainly a point of inflection where you go from not knowing like how your technology is being used to being like where it's no longer realistic to ignore its impacts. And at that point, I think it's, I think most, like when you're really on the cutting edge of innovation and things are kind of like theoretical or used sparingly or like circumstantially, then I can understand why people don't see the impacts of what they're doing. But I think broadly, most people who are working on technologies that are established, that are out there, maybe they're iterating on something that's a year old or been previously used, I think they know, at least to a very large extent, like what the current impact the technology is having, and if they're choosing to make it better, make it worse, keep it the same.
I think some innovators do not put in enough due diligence to know that broad impact that they may create with whatever technology that they're trying to roll out. I do think that also, though, that maybe more people may have an inkling of what can happen once they roll something out. But even assuming whatever can happen is more maybe quote unquote bad than good, some people may still want to push for their product to go out into the market anyways, just because so. And in the words of how you phrased it earlier, like some people are just really hungry for those short-term gains. They want to get their name out there. They want to be the company that released this one thing that changed the world or something, or they want to get the fame, or maybe try to build products that can maybe sell quickly with people. I think an interesting example, I'm reminded of when in the past episode, I think, Jonathan, you were mentioning what was it, the Ford Pinto truck or something, where
Yes.
the company, they were aware of all the bad things, all the flaws with the design, but they still pushed for it anyways because they were trying to, I believe the way how you phrase it was that they were trying to earn more.
Yeah, they did a cost analysis that essentially said like, what is the cost of paying the lawsuits like at the expected rate of accidents that like this design flaw will cause, and they weighed that versus the cost of updating all the cars that they were going to make in the future, and they found that the cost of the lawsuits was less than that of the cost. And this happened during the 60s or 50s even. And that report actually did come out, and it did a lot of damage to their reputation.
Yeah. No, I think maybe kind of along the lines of what you were saying just now, sometimes people are overly eager to maybe leave their mark. I do like to think that most people have some sense of awareness of at least potential impacts, but I do believe there is sort of this inclination to believe that regulatory bodies are going to act as this catch-all that essentially, you know, sweeps in time and applies the correct regulation to prevent sort of misuse or unethical use of certain technologies. So maybe that's kind of where I stand on maybe, you know, where people might be. I don't think they're completely blind to those impacts, but I do think there's a bit of that reliance on the market correction, essentially.
Right.
And so maybe then a last question to tickle your brains, I guess. Do we think that technology, especially with some of the technologies we have now that are, you know, exponential in growth, take artificial intelligence for once, do we think society can keep up with regulation of those technologies? You know, surveillance, biotech, I mean, there's many to pick from.
I mean, I guess we can just even poke at how tech is being handled right now by the government. I mean, you have big tech companies, you have Fang, Facebook, Google, and then even for the past couple of years, you had like the government trying to regulate social media, trying to have more control on what's going on with things going on in Silicon Valley. You know, you had like the Democrats trying with Biden and Harris trying to be way more strict on how big tech companies can go about doing things. After they left office, then you had then you had Trump, the Trump administration, and Trump is being way more lenient and supportive of like TikTok, Facebook, Tesla, even. So it's like, I guess that aside from moving away from the government relations with tech, government has always been kind of really slow with trying to catch up with what goes on with tech, especially nowadays with AI, artificial intelligence. A lot of policymakers sometimes really have a hard time grasping what AI even is and what the full extent of what deep learning can do. I mean, we've had instances where like I remember listening to an episode a month or two ago where middle school students would be creating nude images of other classmates with technology, and then you had people. I think there was a concerned mom whose daughter was affected, was a victim of this kind of thing. She reached out to Ted Cruz, I think. But like, so that was like its own instance. But like government, especially when it comes to policymakers, they're always like a couple of steps behind from what the cutting edge market is doing.
It's like a technical literacy kind of issue. Yeah.
I think that's definitely one factor that plays against society trying to be on the same pace with with innovation right now.
And I think to add a nuance to that as well too, you got the sort of the understanding of the technology itself, and then you got the fact that a lot of those technologies operate internationally as well, or at least across borders. So in addition to that, you have the cooperation of different regulatory bodies internationally, and that in itself can create loopholes as well, depending on what is authorized in one area or another, and you can end up with these sort of very fragmented regulations and, you know, loopholes that maybe enable certain behavior, or at least some gray area cases too.
Yeah, that is certainly a good point. I do think that the government feels like it's 5 or 10 years behind when it comes to AI's issues like AI, issues like social media,
definitely.
really like modern cutting edge things that are affecting us. I think that maybe part of the solution is encouraging like technical researchers or experts to like, you know, be advisors to policymakers and like to kind of like provide that technical literacy. I also think that, but I don't think that we as a society should throw up our hands and let, you know, technology run rampant
and
it's doing harm. I think that one tool we can use is either like consumer advocacy, like as an example, like I don't think that like social media is very good for society as a whole. So like I personally don't like support it or use it very often, or like basically the bare minimum to update my LinkedIn profile and such. But there's other better examples, but it really is true that people like do have some power to either like influence lawmakers or just to choose like where their money goes and what they support and how they organize.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and this probably aligns with what you're saying, that ultimately we are the ones who have that moral obligation to understand the consequences ourselves. I mean, it's great to have regulatory body, but if they are somewhat more reactive than desired, I think consumer advocacy is a powerful tool, definitely should be used. And hopefully, as innovators ourselves, we can have the more proactive approach of trying to, at least as best we can, proactively understand the consequences. When then the rest can hopefully be true nets and catch-alls rather than the ultimate safeguard against us. So
hopefully, yeah.
Well, with that, let's segue into our second segment, Thanks Mom, which we're also going to spice up a little bit. We'll have Eugene dramatically give us our 2 words of the day, and then you'll get a wonderful time lapse of us scrambling. And then eventually coming up with our best ideas yet.
Yep. Let's see what Mom has in store for us. All right. Let's see. This one will be fun. In light of our new format, this week's prompt will be neon waffle. Neon waffle. So I guess the time starts now. We'll do like 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Give ourselves 10 minutes for neon waffles.
Cue the time lapse.
Oh dear. I got 3, including 1 terrible one.
Nice.
I've got 3 terrible ones.
Yeah.
This will be fun.
All right. Let's see. Neon waffles.
Okay.
So how should we do this? Should we?
One idea each. Let's just go
Yeah,
round
let's
robin.
go for it.
All right.
So you know how you got Fruit Loops, very colorful?
Yeah.
Fruit Loops, but instead tiny waffles as cereal.
Nice.
With something like color outside the lines. Because when I think waffles, I'm thinking little grids and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
But
the splotches of color.
Yeah, that'd be delicious cereal, right? You got all kinds of shapes, but I don't think I've seen waffle as a cereal. Like tiny,
That's a good one.
centimeter square, colorful
that
waffles.
better not be the bad one. That better be one of the good ones.
I think that's one of the more acceptable ones.
All right. My first idea I had was just like a room decoration of neon lights arranged in a variety of shapes, like a square or a circle, like a hexagon. Like you have a waffle that's like a grid, but imagine you have like maybe bars of like neon lights in that.
Okay.
In that kind of orientation. I can't talk, but like it'll be like people could put it on their walls if they want to decorate something super low key and a casual product. You can just go buy it like Best Buy,
like decorative sign or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. For my first idea, I thought of a non-reactive chemical trap. So what it is it's waffle shaped. It has all these little frills that if you spill a chemical, it like won't go out and like it'll be like compartmentalized. And because neon is a noble gas, this waffle, which would be made of probably like Teflon or some other like non-reactive material, it'll probably be specialized for whatever you're working with, would be able to collect liquid spills and prevent maybe like different chemicals from mixing in the trap.
Okay. I can say that for analysis and testing or something. Yeah, like multi-sample. All right, I'm going to give my bad idea first then, because it kind of is a different take on that one.
Okay.
But still on the food. I was having a hard time moving away from food on this one. So I'm picturing waffles, but they're made of bread, just very colorful, just because neon as well. But you know how some people love to eat their food in very heterogeneous, compartmentalized ways where they like separate everything?
I could name some people, yeah.
There you go, yeah. Each pocket of the waffle has its own like different changing sauce. It's not.
It's like a bento box.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a little bento box, but it's like waffle bread and a sandwich.
Okay. It's like an advanced bread bowl.
Advanced bread bowl, yeah.
Bread bowl, yeah.
TBD on the market for that one, but that's what came to mind.
Okay.
I can imagine it could be just like a baguette, and then you just make multiple holes in that inside baguette. That could be like the quickest prototype. To get that.
Like a bread bento box.
Viable.
There you go. All right. So while we're talking about food, my, I guess, quote unquote lame idea was just glow in the dark waffles.
I'm here for it.
I don't know if that's a thing already.
Yeah,
but,
I'm sure you can make it a thing. Yeah.
Maybe some people might be into that. If you have like a Halloween party, maybe some people want glow in the dark waffles.
I could see the ad for this. Are you tired of losing your waffle in the dark?
There you go.
Now for 2 hours after sunset, you can still find it.
There you go. Yeah, try and eat like a waffle in a college dorm without disturbing your roommates. There you go.
Very nice. Well, one use of neon is as a cryogenic coolant.
Okay.
So I was thinking you could lean into that and create a super fast ice cube maker. So it maintains the trademark waffle shape,
Oh.
But what you do is like, have you ever opened up your freezer and you don't have any ice cubes, but you have
very
the ice cube
disappointing.
maker just sitting there? Very
Yeah.
annoying. So you take it out, and it's essentially acts as a thermal battery. It has probably like a phase change material
Yeah.
that's at like probably the lowest that the freezer operates at.
Mhm.
And then you pour water in there, and it's like very thermally conductive, and it quickly makes ice cubes.
Yeah.
Like you can just leave it on the counter. You don't have to put it back in the freezer because it has so much thermal inertia.
That's cool. That should be pretty cool for small bars or stuff like that, where they
Mm-hmm.
can't just have a ton of ice, but then you make it quickly. Especially if you have some in like unique shapes, that could be kind of
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah,
You can have all these little compartments.
little copper molds or something, so you don't have to spend like 10 minutes like carving it. You can just,
No, yeah, I love the idea of how you're using the little divots in a waffle to like fill up the water to make the ice. It's kind of, it reminds me of like the whole the bento bread idea. We're using it to put different things in there. So
Well, now I'm wondering, depending on how long it takes, if it was like say like a minute or two, maybe you can put in an order and you can have your customized little ice cube that comes in your drink or something.
That'd be cool.
That'd be kind of fun.
Yeah.
So I went in a very different direction too. At some point, I started going on gridded ion engines because I was thinking waffles, cafos, obviously, right? And then I was thinking, like, if you take the plan of a building and you kind of take the top cross section, you look at it downwards, and you look at all the rooms, it kind of looked like a waffle. Yeah, it looks like a waffle if you use your imagination. I was thinking neons, signs, and stuff like that. So I was thinking, like, you know, when you're walking around a big building, you just can't find the office.
Yeah.
Indoor GPS navigation, basically, just like a little neon sign or something, like a little app on your phone, just kind of go around, but like on a much smaller scale where maybe you know the building and it's like, hey, take this staircase, not the other one that leads you to the janitor's closet, right? And
that's really convenient, actually. I can't. There's so many times where I try to find a room, like they give you an address to go somewhere, but it's like, well, what suite, what room, and like you're in this gigantic building, and like I don't know where to
Especially
go.
on campus, and you have these massive buildings.
Yeah.
And those are like public spaces that should be mapped. So,
exactly.
yeah.
You'd probably feel lost like an ant on a waffle.
There you go.
There you go.
All right. So my third idea definitely was in a different direction. So no more food. I was thinking top level, it'll be like just a next gen stack of like semiconductor wafers. I mean, if you see a picture of them, they kind of look like a waffle already. You know, we're already using extreme ultraviolet lithography to create chips nowadays. And people are talking about quantum computing. That's still completely R&D, and you know, who knows where that's going to take us. So I can't speak much about chip manufacturing, but maybe that's what came to my mind, where like I saw a waffle and I was thinking that looks like a semiconductor wafer. So maybe that could just be the neon waffle, could just be a funny name to call whatever comes next after whatever with what we have at the moment, which could be still, I mean, we're at the need where we need more computing power, but we're kind of at a quote unquote energy crisis as well, and we need more computing power to power artificial intelligence, deep learning models, whatever will come afterwards, if we go into space or other things as well.
That could be the next foundry name right there.
Yeah.
Neon
Neon
waffles.
waffle. Okay,
It's
and
quite
for my
innocuous.
final idea, it is laser-based waffle art.
Okay.
So-
I wasn't sure that was
Nice.
going to the first half.
So, you know, neon is sometimes used as a gas for lasers.
Okay.
And I thought, okay, well, what if you could like essentially 3D print like your waffle to be any shape you want it to be?
Ooh, like an edible waffle dough? Or,
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So it would basically be like a resin printer where like the initial layer floods, and then a laser on the top would like draw out the first layer, and then it would flood a little more, then you draw out the second layer.
Okay.
And with this, you could like build up a waffle that's any shape, that's like a 3D structure.
Yeah. My mind is going to like you're printing something else, like a steak in the future, but then you got a waffle scaffolding to support it as you're printing.
Hey, if you're advanced enough, you can print like a hamburger, you know, with the different layers and stuff.
And then when you're done, boom, sandwich.
Yeah, because I think there have been some initiatives to like print food because you can,
Yeah.
But this is one
Cool.
I have not seen before. The biggest challenges to overcome are probably sanitary ones. Like how do you, with the excess batter, for example, you probably have to freeze it and then like warm it up again or do something to keep it from that.
I'd be down for some waffle 3D printing. That feels like a very Fifth Element kind of thing to do. So
Yeah.
I support it.
Would make for some good gimmicks at restaurants. You know?
Yeah.
You could have waffle in the shape of New Jersey.
Combine that with the bento sandwiches and the custom ice cubes, and
Yeah.
you know, have some chips on the side.
Yeah, I just saying neon waffle would be quite an interesting restaurant.
Yeah. Nice. Well, I think those are some good ideas.
Wait, I thought you said you had one more idea.
Oh no, I ran out. I was going through a bunch of different things like recessed LEDs, still those gridded ion engines, and no, that's the, you know, I was trying to think of it through different things like waffle, grid, sweet, pockets, you know, neons, lights, bright and stuff. But nope, that's all I had in the 10 minutes. All right. Well, thanks y'all for joining. We hope you like this new format we're trying out. Let us know in the comments how you feel about it, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.
See you next week.
See ya.
Yeah.